DDI, we turn data-driven insights into dynamic leadership development, unlocking potential, sparking growth, driving performance, because better leaders create a better future.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Leading on Empty, Leadership Fatigue and HR's Strategic Response. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we meet today, and I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. A few housekeeping tips before we begin. We will be together for around 30 minutes, and you can find today's slides in the additional resources section of your console. The webinar is being recorded and you will receive a link to watch on demand later today. The attendee chat feature is open and we encourage your comments and responses. We are interested in any thoughts or questions you may have, so please use the chat or Q&A feature and Amber and Matt will make sure to respond to you after the webinar. And now, let's bring in today's presenters, Amber and Matt.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Leading on Empty, Leadership Fatigue and HR's Strategic Response. Today, we are very excited to have many of our existing clients joining us, but we're also fortunate enough to have a number of new faces with us. So for those of you who are not as familiar with DDI, we are a global leader in leadership assessment and development, founded in 1970 and currently operating in more than 26 countries worldwide. We partner with organisations to build strong leadership pipelines through leadership assessment, succession management and behavioural science-based development programs. My name is Amber and I'm here with my colleague Matt, and thank you all for taking the time to join us here today. And it's very clear from the responses to our webinar invite that there is a high level of interest in this topic. The issue of leadership burnout is really resonating with people, both professionally and personally.
Yeah, it sure is, Amber. And I think that the dual challenge of helping leaders overcome personal fatigue while also addressing leadership scarcity is a once-in-a-generational HR crisis that's being felt across all industries and geographies.
It absolutely is, Matt, and it's such an important topic. So this will really be the first in a series of webinars that we plan to run over the next 6 to 9 months. And in many ways, this webinar will really set the tone for upcoming sessions where we'll dig a little bit deeper into some of these topics in a lot more detail. We would really like today's session to be both an exploration of the current situation, but perhaps more importantly, a moment of reflection that challenges us all to think about the path that we're on with respect to leadership and leadership development. There's no question that we live and work in interesting times and the pace of change is accelerating at a rate that we've just not experienced in the past. This creates a very different context for leaders, as well as for those responsible for preparing leaders across organisations. So today we'll be diving into an issue that's both urgent and somewhat uncomfortable, one that sits right at the heart of leadership and talent conversations everywhere. The core issue many organisations are confronting today and into the future is one of scarcity. Scarcity is a core concept in economics. It describes conditions where resources, whether natural or human, are limited and cannot meet all of our needs and desires. And as you know, economics at its core is the study of how individuals, businesses and societies make choices in the face of this constraint. When we think of scarce resources, we often imagine commodities like water, minerals or energy. However, in economic terms, human resources, including leadership, are just as vital. Leadership as both a skill and a resource is increasingly scarce, and the data backs this up. The simplest way to think about this in terms of leadership is what is impacting supply and demand. Let's start with the demand side because there's no sign that the need for leadership is decreasing. If anything, it's rising. And when I say leadership, it's not just quantity, it's quality as well. When you think about the world leaders now operate in, we have artificial intelligence transforming work, we have geopolitical volatility, significant cost of living pressures, sustainability expectations, hybrid work and relentless public scrutiny. The demand for capable, courageous and purpose-driven leadership has never been greater. Organisations are really crying out for people who can guide, inspire, adapt and make sense of all of this complexity. Leaders are being asked to concurrently perform, and transform their organisations. So the demand for leadership is strong, but the problem isn't demand, it's supply. Across industries and geographies, we're seeing fewer people willing to take on leadership roles. And among those that do, many are stepping away earlier because they're either burnt out, disillusioned, or perhaps even drawn to different ways of working and living. Executive turnover is up and succession pipelines are thinning. In our 2025 Global Leadership Forecast, we found that 80% of HR professionals lack confidence in their leadership pipelines. And McKinsey's 2023 research shows leadership burnout has risen by more than 40% since 2020. Perhaps even more of a concern, though, is the fact that many emerging leaders, our Gen Zs, are choosing not to pursue a career in leadership, a trend described as conscious unbossing. This trend of conscious unbossing isn't just about structure. It reflects a deeper cultural shift. It's a re-evaluation of what leadership actually means. And at its core, conscious unbossing is a response to the leadership models many people, particularly those younger generations, have grown up watching. They've seen leaders burn out, they've seen leaders sacrifice family, health, work-life balance, and they've seen the cost of constant visibility and pressure. And essentially, this generation is saying, that's not the kind of life I want. For many, though, it isn't a rejection of leadership itself. It's a rejection of the type of leadership they've witnessed in the past. If I think about the number of conversations I've had over the past month that involve leaders who are taking a career break midway or stepping away from leadership due to stress or burnout, is actually quite alarming. A close friend of mine recently stepped into the role of a CPO about 6 months ago. And this role of CPO was always her career goal. I've seen her work through a number of organisations, always setting those short-term goals to get to that next level. And when I caught up with her the other day, she actually shared that she'd already left the role. And when I asked why, she said she was just tired, burnt out, wanted to spend time with her family. She wasn't even sure that she wanted to be a CPO anymore.
Yeah, that really is telling, isn't it, Amber? And it's something that we're hearing more and more of. It reminds me of a conversation that I had just last week as well, but more on the emerging leader side of the equation. There was someone I was speaking to named Alex, who's trying to figure out their next career move. And they mentioned wanting career progression, but the first thing that they stated is that they are not interested in their manager's role. They value that in their current role, they already are respected by their manager and treated as a peer, that they have niche expertise that is valued in the organization, that they have a lot of autonomy, and that they value the exposure to the executive team more than they value more pay or a higher title and seniority. And I think that that was indicative of what we're starting to hear more and more.
Absolutely, Matt. And Gen Z in particular is really reshaping this narrative. It doesn't mean, though, that they lack ambition, but rather they redefine success to focus on skill development, impact, and autonomy. So unlike previous generations, they're not chasing that corner office or the big executive package. They're driven more by things like meaning, flexibility, and impact, so not hierarchy. So similar to your example, Matt, our Gen Zs really want to maintain that technical expertise rather than give it up completely for leadership. They want balance, not to be burnt out. According to our research, these Gen Zs are actually 1.7 times more likely to step away from leadership roles compared with other generations. And that's a really sobering statistic for me. And it highlights a widening gap between what organisations need and what emerging talent is actually prepared to take on. So where does this actually leave us? We have this rising demand for leadership and declining supply. It really begs the question, who will lead in the next 10 to 15 years? And just as importantly, what will leadership even look like? How do we design leadership roles and leadership development, for that matter, that people actually want to step into? And how do we as HR and leadership professionals prepare our organisations to thrive in this new reality? So these are some really big questions, Matt, but I'm interested in your perspective on what the future of leadership will look like.
I'm happy to provide my thoughts. I think that in general, we're going to see less hierarchy, flatter organizations, and probably a lot more creativity used in the titles and job responsibilities that we see. I also anticipate that we'll see increasing amounts of lateral moves, but also seeing a normalization of stepping down the ladder instead of only up. And these are things that are informed by the research that we've been reviewing, some of which we've already alluded to today, and more of which we'll share with you. And I think that in addition to these observations, we're also really interested in hearing from all of the experienced people in the room today. We have a lot of people with a lot of knowledge that are joining us in the webinar, and I want to toss it to all of you for your input. What do you think will look different in the future of leadership? Go ahead and put an idea or two into the chat to share with the group, and after the webinar today, we'll collect all of those ideas into a forecast that we can distribute to everyone who's attended. So we've established that the supply of leadership is tightening, but not because there's less talent in the world, rather because leadership propositions no longer fit the values and motivations of today's workforce, and particularly younger generations. And that brings us to a critical question, which is, what do we as practitioners do about it? How do we reimagine our concept of leadership and our approach to leadership development? We'll start with examining how we view leadership. Research by McKinsey and Robert Walters in the UK highlights that career pathways need to evolve from the traditional path of expert to manager to leader, the ladder that we're all familiar with. We need to look beyond the ladder because employees today are starting to treat their careers more like a road trip, one that meanders and that has both planned and impromptu stops along the way, and one that includes taking a break when they get tired. An often overlooked problem here is that the workforce gets tired faster and takes the off-ramp sooner when we don't help them build a road trip, and when we instead try to force them back onto the traditional ladder. Today's emerging leaders want to build expertise rather than leaving it behind to become a generalist leader. They want to grow their influence through thought leadership, specialization, and meaningful contribution, not through titles or reporting lines. They don't aspire to the administrative overload that has come to define many leadership roles, and they don't want to be told that leadership means subordinating themselves for the greater good. While that's a very noble narrative, it implies that there's a great personal cost, and it's one that fewer people are volunteering to pay today. And that means the opportunity and responsibility for us as HR professionals is to reframe how we position leadership. To use an example, in recent years, I've worked with a lot of organizations that have made a strategic decision to label everyone as a leader. I've seen capability frameworks, organizational values, development programs, etc., that explicitly state and draw attention to the fact that here at this organization, everyone is a leader. And I think this is a great and important concept. It's an important move away from a history of having less empowered individual contributors. But given what we've just learned about how younger generations perceive the word leader and everything that comes along with it, I want to challenge us to reconsider the phrase. What if instead of saying everybody is a leader, we said everybody leads? You could argue, of course, that this is just semantics, but language does signal intent. And behind this reframing, we have an intent to make a genuine shift in mindset and commitment. And that leads us to the role of HR. Since 2018, DDI has been researching and tracking the evolution of HR's strategic influence through 3 roles that we've defined, which are called reactor, partner, and anticipator. Reactors are when HR teams primarily respond to immediate needs. Partners is when we are collaborating, but mainly executing on already established strategies. And anticipator is when we are proactively forecasting future talent needs and driving strategic talent decisions aligned with business goals. Before the pandemic, a lot of HR teams were acting as anticipators. And in fact, it was more than ever during history. We were using analytics to forecast talent gaps, and we were proactively shaping the future workforce. But when the pandemic hit, we very understandably became reactive. We needed to focus on people's health, on the shift to hybrid work and around restructuring. But in many organizations, we haven't really shifted back. We've remained in that reactive state, and not necessarily by choice. Now, most HR professionals today, including many of you on the call and many who we work with, spend time performing all three of these roles from one day to the next, or even one moment to the next. So we want to hear from you. How many days of the week, on average, do you spend in the role of anticipator? If you could please answer with this poll, we would appreciate the input.
It's an interesting question, isn't it, Matt? So while everyone's taking the time to answer to the poll, I thought I'd share a comment from a client recently that I found really interesting. This is a client who I would view as being an anticipator. And she was actually sharing her frustrations that she wasn't able to spend much time of late in that anticipator space, as her organization had faced so much change and there'd been so many restructures recently that it meant that she was really forced into that reactive space. So whilst we might view ourselves as being anticipators, we can be easily trapped in that reactive space.
Yeah, that's a story that we hear quite a lot right now, that the way that we want to show up for our organization is not actually mirroring the way that we're perceived or treated by our organization or our stakeholders. And we're seeing that a little bit perhaps in the data here in our poll. It looks like for the most part, we're spending between 1 to 3 days a week in an anticipator space. But regardless of whether you're in that 1 day a week zone or you're in the 5 days a week zone, there is a business case for spending more time as an anticipator. And we want to share some of that data with you today so that you can help to make that pitch and make that argument with your executives, with your stakeholders, for why they should be perceiving you differently, treating you differently, and giving you space to be in that futurist role. Compared with reactors, anticipator HR functions are 3 times more likely to make better hiring decisions. They're 1.4 times more likely to respond effectively to change. And they're 4 times more likely to have a strong leadership bench ready for critical roles, which is a huge component of the problem that we're all here to solve today. Additionally, they report a higher level of high quality leaders and better high potential outcomes compared to reactors. In McKinsey's State of HR 2024 study, only 11%, or 1 in 9 HR leaders, said that their function is highly effective at preparing for future talent needs. But those that were doing so were outperforming their peers on both business and talent outcomes. So very powerful data here. What does it mean for all of us in HR and talent functions? It means that we have a responsibility to play a role as organizational futurists, scanning the horizon, reading the signals coming our way, and helping our organizations prepare for what's next. When CEOs are wondering how to navigate a world where the pace of change is outpacing our readiness, our anticipatory capability isn't just valuable, it's vital. It's how we ensure leadership as a system evolves in step with the world around us, helping our organizations perform for today and prepare for tomorrow. So if HR's role is to be a futurist, to anticipate and architect the future of leadership, what does that mean for how we prepare individual leaders and the people who are considering stepping into leadership roles? How do we give our emerging generations of the workforce the confidence that they can lead successfully without sacrificing what matters to them? That's where Amber's going to take us next, how we prepare leaders.
Thanks, Matt. So far we've looked at the leadership supply challenge and the role that we as HR can play as an organizational futurist. Now let's bring it down to the individual level. How do we prepare people for leadership in a way that gives them confidence to succeed without losing themselves? If we accept that the nature of leadership needs to evolve, then leadership development itself must also evolve. Gartner's Future of Leadership 2024 research found that 82% of organizations now define leadership as distributed, meaning it's lived through daily influence rather than hierarchy. So if we think about it, the skills once described as the domain of leaders are actually relevant right across the organization. Coaching, influencing, building networks, exercising judgment. These are not just the skills of leaders, They're the skills that deliver impact right across the organisation. So leadership development is not simply a tool to build leaders, it's a tool to build leadership, something that drives both individual and organisational impact. So one of the first things we can do is reframe the role of leadership development and emphasise the personal impact that developing these skills will have. This helps to build confidence and impact for everyone. It also serves to open up possibilities for individuals who may be hesitant about taking on a leadership role. And as you know, the reality for many frontline leaders is that many receive little or no preparation for leadership. Multiple studies, including DDI, Gartner, Deloitte, all report that up to 60% of frontline managers receive no formal leadership training. So no wonder the idea of taking on a leadership role feels daunting and unappealing. So what will stay the same and what will we need to do differently? We'll touch on how we can use assessments and be by the side of leaders shortly. But let's take a look at what hasn't changed. And if anything, these things are even more important because more people across organisations need exposure to leadership. Firstly, leadership skills don't come naturally. No one is born with the ability to navigate conflict perfectly, read a room, make tough calls under pressure, or balance empathy with accountability. These capabilities don't just show up when someone receives a title. They have to be learned, practiced, refined, and reinforced through experience. Secondly, leadership behaviours and habits develop over time. Leadership is a craft. It's built gradually through repetition, feedback, and through small experiments in real moments. New habits take time to strengthen, and old habits take time to unlearn. That's why consistency, reflection, and support matter just as much as content. Thirdly, learning and performance needs are not homogenous. There's no one-size-fits-all pathway to leadership. What one leader needs in a moment of struggle may be completely different from what another needs. People arrive with different strengths, fears, cultural experiences, motivations, and levels of confidence. So trying to shape leaders through uniform programs is like trying to coach every athlete in the same way. It ignores the individuality that actually makes leadership effective. And finally, leaders continue to face what we know as the evergreen challenges. And those challenges aren't going away. Things like having difficult conversations, building trust, having to influence without authority, lead through change, manage conflict, make decisions, coach. These are the foundations of leadership. And the foundations are the foundations for a reason. They remain relevant, not because they're simple, but because they're hard. Every generation struggles with the same leadership moments, just in different contexts. So when we talk about rethinking leadership development, we're not throwing out the fundamentals. We're just recognizing that the way leaders learn and the context in which they apply these skills has changed. And there are some things that have changed, isn't that right, Matt?
That is right, Amber. And we're going to look at 3 shifts in particular that we need to make to accommodate those changes. The first shift is to make learning more human-centered. For a long time now, leadership development has been designed primarily around organizational priorities and needs. And while organizational needs are very relevant and important, emerging leaders want to also know what's in it for them. They're asking questions like, will leadership fit into the life that I want to lead? Can I stay true to my values in this role? And will it allow me to remain well, meaning emotionally, physically, and mentally healthy? Being human-centered means starting with the leader as a whole person rather than as a resource to be positioned. It means acknowledging that what people value, autonomy, meaning, well-being, and safety, is central to whether they will even consider stepping into a leadership position. And it means that development needs to support their sense of identity rather than dissolving it or forcing it into a one-size-fits-all mold. The second shift is to equip people not just for role readiness, but for personal growth. Traditional leadership development has often been about preparing people for the next rung on the ladder, readying them for a title that they may or may not want, but the new expectation is different than that. Leaders want development that helps them to grow emotionally and in their understanding of themselves, to build confidence and clarity, and to navigate complexity in ways that feel authentic to them. It's a shift from training for the job to growing the person, and from leadership as a destination to leadership as a capability. When we equip employees for this type of personal growth, a powerful thing happens. Even if someone never chooses a formal leadership role, they develop the ability to lead themselves and others in meaningful moments. And that's what we mean when we talk about developing more leadership, not just more leaders. The third shift is to focus on moments rather than on events. For decades now, leadership development has been organized primarily around events like programs, workshops, degrees, or perhaps an annual offsite meeting. But that's not how leadership occurs. Leadership is lived daily, moment to moment. It happens in conversations that we weren't prepared for. It happens in tough decisions that we have to make under pressure. It happens when projects go sideways, when a team member needs our support, when we're already stressed, or when we need to choose courage over comfort. And those are the moments that shape our reputations, our relationships, the things that build trust, credibility, and culture. And development needs to be there when those moments happen, rather than weeks before or months afterwards. This moves us from being episodic to being embedded, from learning that is event-based to experience-based, and from curriculum to contextual support. And a piece of good news here is that modern technologies, things like artificial intelligence, are really accelerating our ability to do this. We can offer a curated real-time guidance, reflection prompts, coaching, nudges, realistic practice simulations, and do all of these things in a way that we couldn't even imagine when many of us started our careers. And this is another topic that we are going to dive into in more depth next year, how to use modern technologies to provide meaningful, personalized, and continuous support that gets good leadership guidance in people's moments of need. And together, these three shifts around being human-centered, focusing on personal growth, and orienting learning around moments changes how we design and deliver leadership development. This requires us to honor the individuality of each leader, to support their well-being as much as their performance, to build systems that surround leaders with guidance in addition to content, and provide insight when leaders need it the most. And I want to talk more about providing timely insight in particular, because it's a crucial ingredient for meaningful, personalized growth. And that's the second thing that we want to reframe for you today. Meaningful insight helps individuals understand what they bring to leadership. It sets them up for success while also shining a light on what could derail their success. And assessments play a vital role here, but we need to rethink how we use them. Traditionally, assessment has been an organizational tool, a way to make decisions about people. And at DDI, we call that Big A assessments. These are the validated tools that we're all familiar with, including things like the Hogan's, DDI's Assessment Center, 360s, simulations, and many others. While these are vital for identifying potential and targeting development, we also want you to embrace little a assessments, by which we mean small, embedded, just-in-time insight tools that help individuals understand how they show up in real moments. As a small example, before a difficult conversation, I might complete a self-insight tool around communication styles and discover that I'm more inclined to be direct versus empathetic, whereas the person I'm meeting with might be the reverse. And that insight will help shape my approach and increase my chance at a positive outcome in that conversation. In a nutshell, Big A assessments give the organization visibility, while little a assessments give the individual agency. When we combine these kinds of reflective tools with AI, there's a huge amount of potential. We can deliver real-time feedback, in-the-moment coaching, and guidance that helps leaders apply awareness as challenging moments unfold for them. It's another topic that has more to it than we can cover today, so keep an eye out for a webinar on little a assessments as well as a 2026 webinar. The third thing we want to reframe today is how we can be continuously by the side of leaders. Our industry has treated leadership development as a series of events, programs that we attend when we hit a certain level, but leadership itself is not episodic, it's continuous. Our approach should mirror that reality by staying by the side of leaders and people who demonstrate leadership as they face their most critical moments. And this idea of being by the side of leaders is a defining principle for us at DDI, and one we want to help instill in you as well. Our goal is to be there when leaders need us the most, helping them navigate moments that matter with insight, guidance, and personalized growth. That philosophy has led us to evolve our design principles and ensure that we build development resources that reflect the changing needs of organizations and leaders. And today, we challenge you to make that shift in your thinking as well. To not just rethink leadership development, but to rethink leadership, what it means to lead, why people choose to lead, and how we as HR professionals shape that experience for the future. It isn't about abandoning what works. It's about recognizing that the world has changed, and so too must our approach. It's not about developing more leaders. It's about developing more leadership. And it's not about rejecting the past. It's about reimagining the future, creating leadership that is sustainable, human, and deeply aligned with the world in which people want to live and work. We hope that today has encouraged you to pause and reflect with us on how we can create a vision of leadership and a version of leadership that excites the leaders of tomorrow. So the final question we'll leave you with is, how will you help the leaders of tomorrow to lead well? And with that in mind, we also want to ensure that DDI is by your side, meeting you in your moments of need by bringing you the right insights at the right time. So we'd like your input on which webinars to host next. Which of the topics we've touched upon today would you like to explore with us further? How to leverage little A assessments to drive personal growth, how to deliver continuous development that meets leaders in their moments of need, or how emerging trends like AI are impacting leadership development. We really appreciate you taking time to reflect with us today, for letting us know that this conversation was needed, and for keeping us informed around other topics of interest to you. I also want to thank you for all of the input you've put into the chat today. We will be going through all of that and creating a bit of a report to share back with the audience.
So look, a big thank you on behalf of Matt and I, and of course the rest of the team at DDI, to all of you who attended today. Thank you for taking the time to contribute, and please keep an eye out to your invite for our next webinar. And if you have any specific questions for Matt and I that you posted in the chat, we'll absolutely endeavour to connect with you personally. So thanks again, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.